we seem like we gave really bad jokes.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
I was going to say,
Oh, sorry.
this sounds like very bad bar jokes. But a minister, a priest, a rabbi, and a Roshi walked into a theater. Thank you for being here and staying. I'm excited that so many people are here. That's wonderful. So I'd like to introduce our honored guests who decided they wanted to sit on the end of the stage, not the chairs. You might figure out why. Chairs aren't that comfortable. David Neal, who actually was local for a while, left us to New Hampshire for a while, and is now at the United Church of Bernardston. Welcome, David. Father Stan, who is of the Lady of Peace in Turner's Falls, and has been a veteran. Rabbi Efraim from the Temple of Israel in Greenfield. And Roshi Eve from the Zen Peacemakers. Welcome to all of you. I just want to start a little bit. I was interested in doing this, obviously, because I'm directing JC Superstar, and obviously religion becomes part of the foreground of our minds. And I was raised Protestant myself, and 20 years ago or so, started studying Buddhism. So consider myself a Buddhist, but if you read my production note, you know it's religion is theater. And I just have to face that. That's where my true faith lies. And part of what's inspired me is that I saw a piece online and then got a book by Karen Armstrong, who is she was the 2008 winner of the TED Prize, the TED talks. And she wrote that the purpose of religion is really, of all religions, is to practice the golden rule. In other words, to learn compassion. And that's the real purpose of all religion. I have great respect for all religions in their purest forms, and that is why I invited our honored guest to come and speak to us, because I think every religion has something valuable to say, whether you adopt it or you do not. And I also believe that if we could all sit on the edge of the stage, a lot of the world's troubles would end. So I welcome my guests. I would like to have them each speak for a few minutes. I don't know if you care what order you go in. And then we'll take comments and questions, and I'll go shut up the people in the lobby. Because I am still in director mode. David, would you like to start? Maybe
I always listen to directors.
I know you're used to that.
I've been on the stage plenty of times.
So maybe 5 or 6 minutes each, and or whatever you want. That's fine. And then we'll take some comments and questions. We are videotaping this. I don't know what we're going to do with it, except that I've been documenting the entire process of JC Superstar on video. So if you have a real problem with it or a problem with being on video, just let me know, and I won't use you. Okay. Let me go shut them up, and you can start.
Can I start? Okay.
Yeah, please do.
Sure, because it's late. And
I hate to miss it.
Thank you all for staying here. Okay. Is that because I sat in the center? Because I'm here. It's a pleasure to be with you here tonight, and thanks, Kathy, for sharing that quote from Karen Armstrong. One of the, I think, to me, when you talk about religion in general, I'll get to Jesus Christ Superstar in just a minute, but to me, the purpose or the function, the heart of religion can be seen by looking at what the word means. If you really look at the root of the word religion, it comes from the Latin religare, which means to retie or reconnect. And I think one of the things that is at the root of all the religions of the world is a chance to reconnect to either to the divine or to each other. Somehow we live in a society where we're very pulled apart, we're very separated. And religion, in its essence, is meant to pull us together and reconnect us with each other and with whatever form of the divine that we might hold on to. At least that's my understanding as I go through my ministry. I remember when Jesus Christ Superstar opened up, I saw it on Broadway. I grew up in New York, the suburbs of New York City, so I saw it on Broadway when I was a kid back 42 years ago. 42 years ago, yeah. And so maybe I wasn't so much of a kid, 42 years. I was about 20. But I remember seeing it on Broadway when I was in college, going down to the city. I went to school in the city, and down in Manhattan and saw it there. It was really quite this. And at that point, I think one of the things that went on during that time is that in Christianity there was a movement to try to make Jesus seem more human. We had a lot of history where Jesus had been divine, and if you're looking at, and I look at things as a Christian minister, so I come in kind of from that point of view. One of the things that happens in our faith is that how do you reconcile, how do you deal with this idea of a person in history who is both human and divine? And Jesus Christ Superstar and a lot of other things that happened in the 60s and 70s and in the time since then really is a way to kind of tip the scale from being this divine Jesus up there who, when he walked through the sand, didn't even get his feet dirty, to a Jesus who was much more like you and I, the humanity of Jesus, and we can find much more of a way to identify with it. So I think that kind of is at the root of what went on here with Greenfield today, the whole movement in a lot of other ways since then. I think kind of for me, the whole pivotal question in Jesus Christ Superstar is who do all the characters, from Judas to Pilate to everybody, who do they say Jesus is? And it kind of, again, coming from my role as a Christian minister, when I look at the Gospels, for me, one of the pivotal points in the Gospel stories that some of you may know is Peter's confession. Jesus asks his disciples, he gets all his disciples together at a place called Caesarea Philippi, and he says, this is in 3 of the Gospels, in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. He says to them, who does everybody say I am? Does that sound a little bit like what we just saw up there? Mm-hmm. Who does everybody else say that I am? And they say, well, some people say you're Elijah, some say you're Moses, some say you're one of the other prophets. And then Jesus turns around and says, yeah, but who do you say that I am? And I think that's what's at the heart of this play, is that existential question of who do you say Jesus is? And so I think that's what each of the characters in the show wrestles with in their own way. From Judas, who's kind of the heart of that. And the other thing that Jesus Christ Superstar did is it undemonized Judas for a lot of people. It made Judas into much more of a real human being, in addition to making Jesus into a more human being. It brought Jesus down from the divine, and it brought Judas up from evil, and put them on a more level playing field, so we can see bits and pieces of each one together. Both this show and Godspell, which came out right around the same time, did the same sort of thing. So for me, the heart of this is kind of that question: who do you say Jesus is? And that's what each of the characters in the show have to wrestle with for themselves. And I think when Judas comes out and says, "So what's the verdict?" That's then putting the emphasis back on, the choice back on the audience, because not only do the characters up there have to do it, the people who watch, who engage in that, who understand that, at least from a faith standpoint, have to make that same sort of decision, that same sort of answer. You have to answer that for yourself. It engages you. That one comment that some of you might have missed there. So what's the verdict? That leaves it up to those of us who are watching. So I'd probably talk funny. Is that my
5 minutes? You did great, Dave. Thank you. Father Stan?
Yeah, I wanted to speak a bit about spirituality and religion. There are a lot of people who say to me, I have spirituality, but I don't need religion. And I think that's important. As David was saying, that's one of the things that struck me here, is that there's this kind of, you can think of almost every reason in the world right in this play as to who Jesus is. It's like, part of it is who people need him to be. What's missing in their life, how do they become more fulfilled or more than they are. But I think that beyond the individual, I also see the need for that binding one to another. And let me just give you a couple of examples of how I think it works. For more than 20 years now, I've been involved with, we have an interfaith council of Franklin County, and it's really quite a cross-section of every religious group in the area. One practical thing that happened a few years back was the person who was in charge of the homeless shelters in our county came to the Interfaith Council. What had happened was that halfway through the year, the state had cut the amount of money allocated for the shelter. So what they were planning to do was, if you can imagine this, to close the shelter one night a week during the winter, and then they were going to completely close it from April to October. And so we voted to give them $500. Then I agreed to chair a committee. And we had quite a kind of subgroup. We had the publisher of the Recorder and the president of the hospital and various heads of institutions. And we ended up having a summit meeting at Greenfield High School, in which we got together 100 to 120 community leaders and just people from every walk of life, and we brainstormed on how we could respond to this community problem. And we had students from GCC who were there, and they agreed to have a rock climbing contest and donate the proceeds and so forth. Well, we raised $84,000. And the Interfaith Council, before that, had done a bit of a study, sort of a self-study. Who are we? Part of it was, we asked people in the community, including some of the leaders of the community, select people and so forth, who do you think we are? And what we found was that the community kind of looked to the religious leaders, the religious community, to be a bit of a conscience for the community. And in that, I saw that purpose being served in a powerful way. Another thing the Interfaith Council did, those of you who've been here for a while may remember, several years ago, there were 2 murders, one in Greenfield, one in Turners Falls, of a teenager by a teenager. And we felt that there was an awful lot of negative stuff being said and published about young people. So we started Peacemaker Order, and that's been going on for 12 or 13 years. And we have guidance counselors and different people nominating young people from various schools in the county, and the things that they do to make the world a better place are just incredible. It could be at the local level, working for the respect and the dignity of every person in the school community. We had one person who raised money and went to Ecuador to work on some poverty situation there. Marvelous things happening, marvelous things being brought up. So I think that in recent days and recent years, and what happened in Boston, I think it was the worst of times, it was the best of times. I think we have, in some ways, a society that is broken, a society in which some trust, some basic trust, a social compact or covenant among people. If people don't have trust, then you have a vacuum. Recently, there was a column by Jim Wallace in Sojourners magazine. He comes from the evangelical Protestant world, and he was involved in an economic summit in Switzerland. And so he's calling for there to be a new social covenant which affirms and respects and kind of reestablishes a sense of the common good. But it needs a moral component to it, he argues. It's not just a utilitarian thing. It's not just, because we need to do this, to run things, but that there has to be some shared values. Because I think that if we don't have shared values, if we don't have a shared trust, then there's a kind of vacuum. And there are other people who enter in, and it is their values that take over, and all of society, as a result, suffers. So one final comment. I think we work the best when we all work together. When families and houses of worship and schools and community all work together. Whenever I come here, it's nostalgic. I used to come here to the movies, and it was 25 cents. My mother used to come here to the movies, and it was 5 cents. But it was a simpler time, and back then, if I did something wrong, my parents would know before I ever got home. Okay? It takes a village, and I think that religion helps to bind us together to do that.
Thank you, Father Steve. Rabbi Efraim.
Hi, everybody. I just wanted to give you a little teaching from last week's Torah portion, where we learned that V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha is right in the essence of the Torah. It's right in the middle of it. And V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, I first heard it when I was a little boy, and I heard it was a teaching of Jesus. But whenever I open up Leviticus 19:18, I realize it's right there in the middle of the Torah, and that Jesus was a gifted teacher, and a great storyteller, and a leader. And so that's very instructive to know that the great teachings continue. There was a great man who died last month in Israel. His name was Rabbi Menachem Froman. And Rabbi Froman, you knew Rabbi Froman, yeah? Probably very few of you have heard of Rabbi Froman, but Rabbi Froman was a peacemaker. And he lived in the West Bank, and he considers himself quite on the right wing as a settler in Israel. But he said, the only true peace that's ever going to happen is when the Jews, the religious Jews, and the religious Muslims really look at it together and say, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. It's in all our traditions. And he said, I am an active lover of my fellow man who lives in my gates, in my town, in my village, in my country, even if he is a stranger. He said, that is what I consider to be the essence of my religion. And thousands of Israelis came to bury him last month. And I didn't see it on any news. I didn't see it anywhere. If I didn't have just gotten my iPad and could press it, and then all of a sudden to go right to the funeral, it was really quite an exceptional day. Back in the old days, when we had our holy temple in Jerusalem, we used to make offerings. And these offerings would be a reach nechoach, which is, they would make a sweet smell. So I think the role of religion today is to make sweet offerings to God. And what is that, to make sweet offerings to God? Making sweet offerings to God, for me, comes through opening my mouth and singing. Making a pleasant sound unto God. That to me is the essence of about the best offering I can make. Now when I'm with Father Stan, and I'm seeing him raise $84,000, I know that my raising my voice is quite minuscule compared to the... it's nice that we all work together. And last month when we remembered the Holocaust, all my neighbors came. People from all the religions come. And when our synagogue was defaced in 1994, the whole community lit candles and said, when you do it to them, you do it to us. And my first experience of that was at Temple Israel in Greenfield. And I'm very grateful to the community that not only allows that, but perpetuates that and makes it an important aspect of how we worship. The prophet Micah said, what does God want from us? It's to do justice and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your king. And it's nice that the reggae people put it to music like that. That's a very good thing. So I'm going to pass it on to you now.
Something about that.
Thank you.
Efraim brought up Rabbi and one of the many tales told about the Menachem Fruman was very close to the various sheikhs. And we met him because we did work in the Middle East. And he was quite something. He was very close to them. He was close to people who were considered terrorists from Gaza. Very close to Arafat. But the story is that he wanted to get together with the sheikh in the city of Jenin, which over the last, since 2004, when they had the siege in Bethlehem, Jenin became fairly militant. So he went to visit the sheikh in Jenin. Well, word went out in Jenin that there was a rabbi there, and a rabbi from the West Bank, a settler rabbi. And a lot of people came around the house of the sheikh where he was visiting, and they were angry, and they wanted him to come out, and they wanted to and there was going to be a lot of violence there. And when they saw that, Menachem Fruman asked his host to open the window, and so he could go out on the porch, and he went out there. And here's this man, Jewish man with a long white beard, and he stood on that porch and he yelled, Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! God is great! Allah is great! Allahu Akbar! So all the people there are seeing the secular rabbi say, Allahu Akbar. And they all started joining him, saying, Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! And then they went home. So that's an interesting segue into Buddhism. Oh man, what a beautiful, beautiful show. I'm so grateful to you and to the actors and everybody who pulled this together. And when I see this story, considered, the greatest story ever told, or one of the greatest stories ever told, I feel that. My heart is totally open, and I say, my God, what a story. Because for me, where I'm coming from, it's not a story about someone who lived 2,000 years ago, and for me, it's not a question, was he man, was he God, was he this or that. The question that they raise in the songs and that he raises is, who are you? Who are you? But that's the question that I ask me. Who am I? Who am I? What am I? When he asks, about, what is the sacrifice I'm going to have to make? What is what is this about? That's a question I ask. That's a question, everybody who practices, in our place asks. Who am I? What's my life? That's why I was so moved by this. For me, those are very personal, deep questions. And Catherine mentioned the golden rule, do unto others what you would have them do unto you. For me, one of the reasons we don't work with that enough in some way is that we don't yet answer the question, well, who am I? And who is this other? And what is this other? And is there an other? When I really see who I am, really, is there another? And there were wonderful scenes here, but I think the scene that most spoke to me, and that I think answers so much the question of the role of religion or spirituality in many ways, is the scene where Jesus is surrounded by people who are sick, or they're poor, and they're in pain, they're in suffering, and his black clothes, and they all want to touch him, they want him to help them, and to heal them, and to remove the pain and remove the suffering. And I thought, man, I'm there, I'm in that scene. And I almost don't know anyone who listens in that scene of saying, I need this, and I need this, and I need this. And he's saying, I'm so small, and the suffering is so big. And in this era, I think many people feel, I'm so small, and the suffering is so big. And so the reason I'm in my tradition is because that is a living question for me. And how to take care of the suffering, and to be big enough to take care of all the suffering. And not just mine, but all those others, their suffering as well. That, I think, is the reason that I come to my tradition.
Thank you. You guys didn't cry. I was already.
I do it.
Questions? Discussion point from our honorable guests here? Yes. Yeah, you in the back.
We are not, I'm moved by that scene as well, because we are, I don't believe that we are individuals. We are all part of the whole. And when you talk about do unto others as you would have it done to yourself, you also have to talk about the responsibility that you have to those others, because you are part of those others. And we are not small if we are all together. And that's what I believe religion and spirituality means, is that we are all together and we have responsibility for each other as well as for ourselves. And it doesn't matter who they are or what color they are or what religion they are. It's because they are part of us. And then we're big. If we're together, we are very big.
That's actually where theater becomes my religion, because I'm constantly telling my cast that theater is a team sport. And that's exactly what happens when you do a show. It becomes even more intense when you're doing a religious-based story. But any theater, done well, has that effect on the cast. And they all know, and I know it's a joke kind of in the program, but I did say to them from day one that every chorus member needed to feel as important as Jesus. No, I meant,
It was a
you know,
great
the actor. And hopefully I succeeded in that, because that's exactly what it is. It's all of them together. And when you create art, you create theater, it is a very religious experience, because the whole is so much greater than the songs. You've got all that artistry coming together and everyone's creativity. Yeah, Joe.
I hate to have you all judge doing posts on me for a sec.
Oh, no, he hates that.
Yeah, I absolutely hate that. But I found that like the most interesting thing about this for me, like the performing aspect of this, has been the different wide varied reactions I've gotten from doing this part more than any other part I've ever played before. I've done quite a few, but I found it's been kind of a mirror pool role. Some people have been like, oh, I hate that character, but you play him so good, or oh, I really embrace the humanity of the role. I was wondering with you what Judas, the readings, the character, the various iterations, what that all means to you.
That's been happening for 2,000 years. And
Well, yeah.
Really people trying to figure out who Judas is, and I thank you for making that really come to life, because I think it shows how complex it all gets. Sometimes I think we sort of grew up with a very black and white picture, and I think part of the brilliance of this is that for everybody, it's this whole swirl of feelings and events and thoughts.
It's happening now.
Yeah, and we hear, but especially for Judas, and I think Judas is the protagonist of this thing. Was brilliant. One thing I had forgot, the scene where you got the TV camera and the microphones, and this is 42 years ago. Andrew Lloyd Webber invented reality TV.
I don't know if he used that particular concept though, Father Stanley.
But you did a fantastic job of bringing out the complexity of it. I don't think it was as simple as it was often portrayed in the literature.
Right, and it's always, as you know, from acting, it's always a whole lot more fun to play the bad guy than the good guy. Because that's, the villains always have a lot more depth of character, because for some reason we all associate more with the bad guy than, sorry Jesus, that's I find a whole lot more in common with Judas, but it's interesting portrayal of Judas in this, as I mentioned before, and also in Godspell, where the same character is both John the Baptist and Judas, and that kind of combination, that dichotomy, of really kind of humanizing that struggle we all go through, and Judas becoming kind of the epitome of that, really is really interesting. I mean, I think it's really interesting facet. Probably was much more in with maybe the historical person of Judas, and maybe more in keeping with what was his motivation. We don't know. We only have how he is understood by the folks who wrote the gospel. So we really have to try to get beyond that to really understand kind of who that historic person was, just as we do to understand who the historic person of Jesus was.
I could have put Joey's on the line and stuff. We have a question over here.
It's pretty big. It's pretty big.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, thank you all. Thank you all. I'm trying an exercise at some point, which was to imagine or ask, who are we all here? In the sense of what is going through each mind or heart or spirit. It's an interesting exercise because there's a lot of static in the way, but it was, what did I get from scanning the active, engaged heart being inspired by art, by theater, particularly, because it's interesting. What I got from that was a sense of in a story. I did a radio program for a long time in New York City, and I did several programs about prayer. and a lot of people expressed ideas about prayer, and I suggested that we see if we could somehow create the actual act of prayer on the air, to pray on the air, not in some kind of, formal religious way, but what do you say? What do you feel? How does it sound when people pray? And people kept calling up a little bit with, well, I think this and that about, with opinions. And I kept saying, that's great, but we're doing something else here, or we're trying. The woman called up and she wanted to try and do it, but she was a little unsure. And I said, just take 15 seconds or so and pray, however that comes up. And there was a lot of suspense because she was clearly engaged. She wanted to try. And I kept saying, you do it. It was about 15 seconds. And then she went, hello? But in an exquisite voice that I couldn't imitate. And this was going a 100-mile radius in New York City. And it was a voice that had questing in it. It had a voice that had confusion in it, aspiration in it, wonder at the idea that there might somebody hear that, excitement at the idea that other people were hearing it. And it's the best example of what I was sort of getting here, that whatever it is in each of us that yearns, that reaches, that's moved, that's stirred, and it may be the desire to, for an answer to one's own suffering, it may be desire to understand love more clearly, but everybody knows at this moment sort of what I'm talking about, those deeper moments when we wonder, when we seek, when we reach. And those to me are sacred moments, which we variously find ways to connect with. And it is religion's struggling, I think, failing effort to meet those questions somehow, and to engage them from where they start, which is in the open human heart.
Thank you. Michael, you have a question?
I just love, as someone who had the pleasure of playing both bad guy and a good guy tonight, I just wanted to say I came to this play because I love it. And I was introduced to this play by my father and his vinyl record. And he always tells the story, I listen to it all through childhood. And he always tells the story of going to opening night in New York. He's from New York as well. Opening night in New York. The African Americans were protesting because Judas was African American. The Christians were protesting because how dare we? Maybe we don't all remember. Rock music was considered sacrilegious. It was evil. And here was a rock musical about Jesus Christ. So Christians were protesting. And the Jews were protesting because of the portrayal of Judas. And yet it was a hit. And even Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice expressed surprise that they were able to bring this to stage under that climate. And I asked, aside from what might be a historical inaccuracy in the role of the Jews in the crucifixion of Christ, because scholars have said that the role of the Romans may have been downplayed because you do not write about their conquerors in a bad way. I'm still confronted with people saying, how can you associate with the show is very hard on Jews. Rabbi, what are your thoughts about how this show treats the role of the Jews and the Jews in the crucifixion of Christ?
I used to fight as a kid all the time for being a Christ killer. And it's taken me a long time to heal those scars and wounds from my classmates. And there's a story that's told about the devil in hell. And he's walking through hell, and his disciples with him, and the devil smiles and says, "You hear that sound? That's the suffering that's happening." And then they walk further, and he said, "You see that guy in chains there? That's another suffering." And then find this big golden object in the middle of hell. And the disciple says, what's this golden object and what's it doing in the middle of the hell? And the devil says, that is pure truth. Pure truth? Aren't you afraid of having pure truth here in hell? He says, don't worry. I'll form an organization around it. So organizational approaches to religion and how people are portrayed, well, they're just somebody's opinion about what they thought. Now, I feel like the Jews were in an occupied situation at that particular time. They had absolutely no power to define anything. It's like blaming the victim. And but it's a historical, it's happened. Whatever happened. We weren't there. We don't really know. And so I don't get too stuck in that stuff. It's sort of, and I also look at it from a place of, as Eve was saying before, I look inside myself and go, okay, what part of me would have killed the truth? What part of me walks through life without being an honorable human being? That's my question. I ask myself, rather than projecting it out there on what happened 2,000 years ago, how can I be a mensch today in the face of some terrible things that are happening, even right now under my nose, under our noses? And I find that it's, I'd much rather praise the good than condemn the bad. And people always ask me about my relationship with Jesus. And I said, if Jesus walked into the room right now, I would sit with him with eyes open, ears open, heart open to receive the transmission from a master. And I think I do that with masters wherever I go. And just to be open to them in different venues and different types. And that's part of a life journey, is how do you know, how can you tell who somebody is? What they're about. And it's through, I know who Father Stan is through his actions, through the way he's kind to our community. I know who my friend Eve is, who travels around the world trying to make peace and making reconciliation with people. And so I'm much more interested in those kinds of issues than the other kind of issue. I hope that is somewhat.
I was just going to say, don't forget, he was not Polish American. Okay. He was your cousin.
Hold on.
I come from an Orthodox Jewish family. You don't.
Not like you. You got some interest.
Right, exactly. When I sit there and listen to this, I cannot deny that there were moments when there was like a little like that. I cannot deny it. Even as I said that I love the story. Man, what a story. And still, because that's part of my history, it's part of my karma. And as Efraim says, I don't think it comes in the actions. But I don't want to lie to myself or anyone and say, oh, it's no problem, I'm very spiritual, I'm beyond all this. No. I feel it. I say, oh. Because it is a rough story. It's what makes it so great. It's a tough story.
Dawn?
I thought it was really interesting, and didn't really go very much, but in the beginning of our personal process, Kathy had us do a homework assignment to kind of write to her about like our upbringing, whether, what our thoughts were about our religion, where we came from, and all that. And somebody awesomely decided to take one of their essays and they put it out for everyone to read. And it slowly started, and then everyone started putting out their actually very cool because, I mean, we get very close to the cast TV show anyway, but I feel like learning a lot, like just sharing that information and seeing how it's touched so many different people and it with the different religions and stuff, it really, it was amazing. It was really amazing. And, you know, I got a lot of comments, you know, from cast members just about what I shared and it really, I really feel like it kind of bonded us together in a way that we wouldn't have had if we hadn't kind of shared our experiences like that. So.
Yeah, the actual assignment was that I wanted them to write about their religious upbringing and then where they are now and how that changed. And some stuck to it that way, some didn't. The thing that was really interesting is that we first ran Act 2 on Holy Thursday, and there was a rush of essays after that. It was just really interesting. We're all like, it was really interesting.
I followed your suit. He's quite religious and I'm not.
So, I'm sorry, Mary. I'm going to go to Mary Kate first. Yeah.
Thank you all for being here. My question is something that's coming up for me over and over again through this process. So when I talked to Kathy about the evolution of the character that I'm playing in this, who starts as a follower of Jesus and then ends up chanting, crucify him. And then I get to be an angel and forget all that. I try to imagine what it would be to cause me to evolve to that vital place. And what I came up with was, I think that a woman would be following Jesus because he was saying things about women that other religious leaders had not said, you know, that you're equal, that you also can share in the kingdom of God. And so I felt that. That's the kind of God that I want in my life. And then, you know, there was the Romans, and then there were the priests saying, this is not okay. You know, this is threatening the norm. Someone's going to die for this. And so then fear, you know, there's a place then where I feel like this woman who was following Jesus is afraid because she sees people be stoned and she knows that she will be punished. And there's a lot of maybe just the patriarchy or religion. I don't know which was the leader in that kind of violence of the society, but I feel like the fear of being killed caused her to say, kill him instead. I don't follow him. So I wonder today, you know, what the role is of religious leaders in somehow stopping that evolution of violence that comes from fear of the other, you know, what you were talking about. Those of you who teach and stand at the pulpit and preach to people about love, you know, how does that, where does violence come out of that? Because today, people kill in the name of religion. And so that, I guess my question's around the evolution of violence and religion's role in stopping it.
Again, by returning to the Torah. The Torah book, for those of you who don't know, it's the Jewish Bible. And last week's Torah portion said there are three things the first three things that are required to become holy. The first one is to revere, honor, some people say be in fear of or in awe of one's parents. That so much comes from how I believe personally that our relationship with our parents has a lot to do with how our relationship to God manifests. So the first thing I was told was honor your parents. The second thing was said, keep Shabbat. And this is where we are tonight on Shabbat. We're in the theater. This is our Friday. This is a sacred night for us.
How are you working?
And always working on Friday night. Come on. It's an oxymoron. And the third thing was not to build idols. And so, you know, basically when I'm trying to de-escalate violence, first of all, I'm trying to de-escalate my own violence. It always, rather than putting it out for anybody else. I'm always saying, what can I do when anything untoward happens toward me? How can I sort of deal with it? How can I do it without adding fuel to the fire? That's part of, it's a very, it's a mindful action of not adding more distress to the world. I remember once I was sitting with with one of my spiritual masters who was teaching a 10-day silent meditation retreat, and I had this aha about we're talking 45 years ago, and I realized at that moment that if we all got off our butts and went down to Washington, we could probably stop the war in Vietnam. And so I got very excited about that, and I decided I was going to get up and make a speech because he was inviting us to use the microphone. And I got up there and I said what I just said to you, and he looked at me and he said, Efraim, he said, if your neighbor comes to your house and says to you, my house is on fire, and you run downstairs and you get a gallon of kerosene to go help him put it out, are you actually helping him put out the fire? And I said, of course not. I'm adding more fuel to the fire. And he said to me something that stuck with me for the rest of my life till this moment. He said, well, that's what happens when you have an agitated mind and you're trying to solve make a solution for a world problem or anything like that. You have to first make sure that you're doing your work. And so it's always, the answer Ramdas always used to say is, the answer is always to work on yourself.
Okay. It kind of reflecting a little bit on what you said, and trying to figure out which direction to go with it. The scene where Mary wipes Jesus' feet with the expensive ointment, and Judas says, "Why are you wasting that?" And Jesus at that point says one of the things that always kind of bugged me a little bit. He says, don't stop her, and Judas says, well, just think all the poor we can help with that. And Jesus says, the poor you're always going to have with you. You're not always going to meet with you. And as a person who's interested in social justice, that has always bothered me. Why Jesus would say that. And I think this is what ministers do. We go a long way around to get to the point. You too, So I think what Jesus is saying there, and the more I kind of deal with this, because this was in our lectionary cycle just a few weeks ago too, so I spent a whole lot of time kind of playing with this. I think what Jesus is saying is that don't lose sight of the need right in front of you because of the big need out there. The big need's always going to be out there. But I'm here right now, and I'm the one, I'm the need. And so don't lose sight of the good you can do here because of the huge need out there. And I think this goes back to the question, how we stop the violence. By it's true, it's everywhere, and it gets so much, that we can't, it's overwhelming. It's like Jesus being surrounded by all the people trying to get a hold of him. You can't do anything. But if you take care of the little thing, does anybody know the starfish, right? Everybody knows the starfish. Does anybody not know the story of the starfish? Probably not enough to waste the time.
We really only have 4 minutes.
All right.
Even though I'd like to keep you guys here all night, I have a very tight traffic.
But just think of the story of the starfish, and remember that it made a difference to that one.
Could I have just one footnote? Peter, I think, is a good answer there too. He bragged, I'll never disown him. And then he did, as we saw here, 3 times. And I think the Bible tries to show there is that when he relied only on himself, when he thought he was all set, he had his act together. That's when he fell flat on his face. Later on, as the story continues, the Spirit of God comes and sort of takes hold. And when we rely on power beyond ourselves, then that's when we can do more. Was that pride cometh before the fall? You know?
I love the characters that were on the stage who were first, love Jesus and follow him and sing for him, and then they want to kill him. And because there's so much fear, as you pointed out, but the fear is a lot of things, maybe patriarchy, they're going to stone me, I'm a woman, and so on. But I think men and women are afraid of what they can really be and what they can really become. Really. It's what our friend Paul said, we have that deep inner quiet voice, and without cynicism, without pride, without any layers, just that voice. And yet we're so vulnerable at that point. And yet it's the deepest strength, that voice that comes from the heart. And we'll turn, and when we have a chance to express it, we're so happy. And then we'll turn on the very person who elicited it. We'll turn on ourselves for doing that and become cynical and angry. But it's really about who we are and who we know we can be. That's how I saw the role. Yes.
I personally feel that if you want to talk about religion and stopping violence, I think the best thing you can sum it up by saying that if our religions taught love, then that would stop violence. I think that's the answer.
Yeah. So, well, and I will say, being involved in this show, one of the things I find is that I picked up on lines from songs in many other parts of my life. But the biggest one for me is God, Thy Will is hard. It's hard. Everything we're trying to do is hard. And we need to keep trying, and we need to do it as a community, and we need to reach across religions and everything that we do because it's hard. But the joy in it is so Dave.
Hi, Dave. Play here. Nice to meet you all. Hi, Dave. Nice to see you again.
Good to see you too. I'm still thinking about our kiss all the time.
I'll give you another one after we're done.
All right. I think I've betrayed you. I'll tell you that's another story.
We were talking at the beginning about who each of the characters in the show said that Jesus was. I'd be curious to hear, and this question was coming, I think you'd be very new. Who do you, the four of you, say that Jesus was? Who does your particular religion say that Jesus was? Was he a man? Was he God? Was he, a superstar that was looking for publicity? Who is Jesus?
It's a good question. Maybe we can get a point.
Oh boy.
Briefly, in a nutshell, yeah.
In a nutshell.
Give an excellent question in a nutshell.
The creedal formula is both God and man, but there's also what I think is a beautiful tradition that was emphasized in the early fathers and mothers of the church, that he emptied himself. He became a human being, and maybe in that showed us how to be really human. So that's who Jesus is for me. I try to empty myself of all that gets in the way.
That's very Buddhist of you, actually.
So interfaith.
That's one.
A person who is deeply awakened to the oneness of love.
I think maybe for me, he's the person in all of history who's most aware of the presence of God within him or herself. more fully than anyone else. However you might define that fuzzy boundary between divine and human, I think that's something we all have. And somehow he was able to walk that tightrope better than any of the rest of us can.
For me, Jesus was a wonderful teacher. And some of the things that he said are paramount in my life. Seek ye first the kingdom of God. Everything that I am, you can become and more. And that's another one that's very important to remember. It's not all about him. It's not about him at all. It's about who we are and how he represents for us what we can become. And who we already are. There's each one of us, in whatever way we choose, can be connected to God in a very deep way. Right now, this is a week of humility for us as Jews. We count the Omer every night. We count this, there's a sacrificial process that we go through. And every night we're contemplating this week on humility. Tonight we're looking at Gevura, the discipline of humility. How do we humble ourselves? And I think Jesus, I love how he went to those who needed help the most, and that he was that essence of helpfulness and kindness, and that's who I think Jesus was.
It's interesting, I mean, there's, this version of Jesus Superstar is updated from the original. And in terms of what you just said, Rabbi, there's an added verse in Hosanna where Jesus says, this was not in the original version, sing me your song, but not for me alone. Sing it for yourselves, for you are blessed. How's the rest of that?
There is none of you who cannot win the kingdom, the slow, the suffering, the quick, the dead.
That's beautiful.
It is beautiful. It's a great addition.
Compliments to you and the whole crew.
And